Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be making a little Mario diorama. So I'm going to start with this little Gundam figure that I had lying around and use him for scale before making a little mold out of some Sculpey to make a little guy, cut him out, make him look like Mario off camera, make a little light Sculpey Bowser. Armature. You can see me here making a shell, and then I ripped it off, and then made it again, and ripped it off again, until I eventually had this shell, which I decided was good enough. And I started poking some little pre-baked spikes in, and using alcohol and a ball stylus to give it some texture stuff. And then proceeding to move it all off camera so nobody can see anything but my thumb, which is what you want when making a video. I then decided to start going on to his head, and I made him little teeth that I decided I didn't like, so I again ripped off his head and completely resculpted it off camera before adding some more clay to his limbs. Here I decide I'm going to make little hands, little claws sculpted all by hand, and then cover it with clay to kind of cover up the claws, and then immediately decided that that was a terrible idea, which is the theme with this video, and I just ripped up the clay and wound up making a bunch of little wormies to make into some pre-baked claws to stick into his arms after, which you can see me do after I sculpt his arms. Now, for some reason, I decided to texture the arms completely differently than I textured the legs. That was a choice. I don't know if it was a good one, but it was a choice. Finishing up with the sculpt of his arms into his body, everything's really messy in his belly area still because I was going to just sculpt that afterwards in some flesh-colored clay. So I'm trying to add some little textures to his neck, which also kind of just doesn't show through in the end, which is on brand for this video. Using a little piece of mesh from, I believe, a bathroom loofah, which had these nice little hexagon scale patterns I used on my T-Rex as well. Poking some little holes for his claws to go into, and then adding said claws after dipping them in a little bit of bacon bond to make sure they don't go anywhere. The translucent Sculpey that I used for the claws is a lot softer and bendier. Didn't want them to fall out. Now, I was sculpting the inside of his mouth and a little bit of, I think, what's called plasterons. It's his belly ribs. Anyways, moving on to the painting, I start adding, greens to the shell. Mario's already been half painted off camera. Do everything with a base coat of some green, and then touching up all of my flesh-colored clay and gray areas with flesh-colored paint, so everything's a little more even before adding the yellow tones. Now, I wound up giving Bowser a little flock mohawk, which doesn't really show through super well, but next time I try something like that, I think I'd like to use static grass instead of just regular flocking. Just doing some dry brushing and over brushing on the shell so it's not so green. adding some alcohol dyes. I like to paint on my fingers, which is something you'll see a lot. There will be paint all over my fingers and under my fingernails and on the table and on things, so that would be why. And then cut some, I think they're 2x2 pieces of scrap pine into some blocks before wrapping them in some lightweight Sculpey, which is really frustrating if you've used it's like handling marshmallow or fondant or something, and the results are great. It bakes really hard and lightweight, like it says, but it feels really gross to sculpt with, if I'm being entirely honest. Using some basic brick baking tutorials on YouTube and stuff, I made my little brick pattern, making sure that they're all offset from each other, but not really caring if they looked a little wonky. It's probably pretty hot with all that lava in Bowser's castle, so maybe some of the minerals in the bricks have started to break down. I don't know. Continuing to cover up everything with my hands, walking away from camera for several seconds and forgetting to cut that out of the footage. Beautiful. Here is a bridge that I also made off camera. If you haven't seen someone make a stir stick bridge on YouTube, I highly recommend going and watching a tutorial on how to make things out of coffee stir sticks. They are incredibly useful crafting materials. Here I'm just coating everything for my towers in a black base coat. Here you can see me working on the failure of a mohawk for Bowser, before touching up Mario, drilling some holes into my towers before dry brushing them with a series of gray and whites before making it too white and then going back over things off camera. A little bit of super glue goes into the holes I drilled. Before sticking the ends of the bridge in the holes. I wasn't sure if this was going to be strong enough to support Bowser, but in the end it was, so thankful for that. And I haven't had to re-glue it or anything. Here I am finishing up the painting of Bowser with some diluted, I think it's sepia alcohol ink, because I didn't like how yellow he was. I wanted him to be a little more, just a little bit more orange. I also wound up adding some UV resin to his eyes and beak, but I don't really know if that showed through very well in the end. And a final staining of some diluted red alcohol ink in his mouth to bring back the pink color. Here I'm cutting up some fiberboard that I had used as my background base image thumbnail thing, and I'm just spreading some wood glue onto a base before adding a mix of wood filler, paper, mache mix, and I think clay, just regular air dry clay from the ground. Find all of those binders help it from cracking, or if it cracks, it looks really rock-like, so it's okay. And just pressing my pieces in so I know where those go approximately. Now here I had a ton of trouble trying to figure out how I was going to make the lava effect. I tried a whole bunch of things off camera that I just didn't bother putting in the video because it was just a big headache. So finally here I'm using translucent Sculpey, which I learned from a 3D panel tutorial, which I will link in the description. It's a really cool video for making lava effects, and here I'm just using a series of stains, and I didn't have any yellow ink, so I wound up just mixing some orange and yellow watercolors, which I wouldn't recommend, but it worked well enough for what I was doing, and I top coated everything anyways, so hopefully those don't just, rub off. Right now it looks really gross, like I'm just making a gross piece of meat or something like that. It's very meat or tree fungus looking. To make everything look a little less like tree fungus, I go over my rocks and everything in black, and you can see I dusted on some black over some spots to block out some of the lights. I built a little box to house an LED I ripped out of a dinosaur lamp. That perfectly fits the little base in place. And with the magic of YouTube, I painted it black and proceeded to make several little covers for this button, which is a touch-sensitive button. These are my failures. They did not pan out. And with all of that done, we're on to the glamour shots. Thank you for watching. Leave a like if you liked. Leave a comment if you comment. And subscribe if you want to subscribe.